Hey, Lit Class, it's January 21st, 2021, and we are starting a new book. You need to get a copy of the book. If you don't already have one, it's also available as a PDF. I will reattach. I did send it once already, but I'll send it again on this email. So I just want to do some introduction work, and we'll talk about this book. This book is called My Antonia. It's by the author Willa Cather, a classic American author. American literature, just makes sense, right? You may catch me every now and then mispronouncing this name and as my Antonia, because my first teacher that taught it to me mispronounced it that way because she had been told it was supposed to be pronounced that way, but it is my Antonia. So not Antonia, but Antonia. That's why there's the little mark there, and she's European, and so they wouldn't have used the sound anyway. So the introduction to the book is first person narrator who's anonymous. We don't know who this person is. All we know is that he or she is a childhood friend of one of our main characters, Jim Burden. Jim Burden was very close friends with Antonia growing up, and Jim will be the narrator of the rest of the story after the introduction. So our anonymous speaker in the introduction tells us that last summer he had unexpectedly met a friend on a train, and that they had spent the journey reminiscing or remembering back to their childhood in Nebraska. And it's hot and dusty on this train that they're riding on, and it reminds them of the weather growing up on the frontier in Nebraska. According to our narrator, our anonymous narrator, Jim Burden works for the railroad now, but he lives in New York. His job is with the railroad, but he lives in New York, and he's not very happily married to a woman that isn't very interesting. And Jim is a quiet man, and he loves the American West. And that's where he grew up, on the frontier in the Midwest, and when it was, wheat fields and small towns. And he has kind of pursued his passion for the West by working for the railroad. Even though he lives in New York, he still, works for this romantic idea of the railroad crossing the country out west. And so that day on the train, they talk about this girl, Antonia, who was a Bohemian immigrant that they both knew when they were young. Bohemia is in the part of Europe that is now the Czech Republic. Back around World War II, they called it Czechoslovakia, but that split up into the Czech Republic and Slovakia. And so this is the part of Europe where she is from. They don't speak English there, so she's come over as an immigrant, speaking no English, as a young girl, or young woman, young girl. So they have these memories, and he tells the speaker, the anonymous speaker, that he's been recording his memories of this girl. And a few months later, he goes and brings a folder containing his writing to the anonymous person. And he says he just finished it the night before, and that he wrote it just haphazardly, just got no organization or form, just as he remembered it, he wrote it down. And he gives the folder to the speaker, and there's nothing written on it, and so he stops and he writes Antonia on it. And then he stops again, and he changes it, he puts the word my in front of it, my Antonia. And that speaks volumes about his story and his memories of her, that she's not just any old Antonia, she's my Antonia. So that's just an interesting little glimpse into Jim and his past and his character. So the introduction of the book is like a frame or a framing device. It's the preface of the novel. It starts right before the book itself, the story of the book, it begins, and it's not written by the same voice as tells us the whole rest of the book. We have this anonymous person, and then we have Jim Burden, who will tell us the rest of the story. And that's what we're going to hear is will be in his, sorry, I lost my train of thought, in his voice. Jim will tell us the story. And My Antonia is like a kind of a love story for Jim. And we don't really know hardly anything about Jim other than what I already told you. And here we are reading this book. This is this private story that he's written about this young woman, Antonia, and we see her through his eyes. But we don't really get a connection to him. My Antonia is the story of Antonia, not of Jim. She is the central figure of the novel. She is the person we're supposed to be interested in and admire as much as Jim does. So it's crucial to remember that Willa Cather, who is the author of this book, through this character of Jim Burden, who is kind of her. It's what they call semi-autobiographical. It's almost like she's writing her story through him. So it's like a woman writing the story through the voice of a man about a woman. So it's kind of, we get these interesting layers, right? She grew up in Nebraska, Willa Cather did. She spent her childhood there, but she doesn't tell us the story from a female perspective. She kind of distances herself from both Antonia and Jim, and so that's the frame. It's like the author has taken her own story. This is a lot about what she lived through. Not that she's Antonia or that she is any specific character, but the experiences are hers. She's taken her experience and put them in a frame for us to see, and she's not so connected to it. It's like an author writing her own story but stepping back away from it. In the introduction, we get a brief mention of the Nebraska climate that's going to be developed a lot in the rest of the novel. In the novel, the place, specifically the Western frontier, is very significant in shaping Jim's worldview of everything and of himself. And so the setting is very much symbolic of the growth and the expansion and the way people developed strength and morality living on the plains. This is one of the stories of America becoming modern just before the turn of the 20th century. Okay, so some themes of this book. I just want to talk quickly about a couple of themes. One of the themes is nostalgia. If you don't know what that word means, it means fondly looking back at something. So, I mean, for us, we might remember an amazing trip that we took with our family, and we fondly look back with nostalgia. Oh, we wish we could do that again. Or we, look back at an experience, or even a time. We can be nostalgia for something that's not even ours. Like, oh, I wish, America was the way it was in the 1950s when, rock and roll first started and people were innocent, and, the America was great and growing, having finished World War II, and it was a great time to be in America, and we're nostalgic for that time. And so nostalgia, remembering fondly, and it doesn't even have to necessarily be a good thing that you remember, but in your memory, the nostalgia of it, the fondness for it, makes it better, if that's understandable. So, and remember, the themes are kind of the fundamental universal ideas that are explored in any literary book, being a novel, a poem, an essay, whatever. So these are the universal themes and fundamental themes. So one of the biggest themes of this book is people's relationship to the past, right? All tied up in nostalgia and memory. The whole central narrative of this book is a look into the past, and the tone of it is very nostalgic. Jim's motive for writing this, part of his motive, is to reestablish some connection with this vanished past on the Nebraska prairie. And so the novel recreates this past, which is Jim's memories and his feelings about those memories. Other characters often look longingly back towards past that they have lost. Antonia's family looking back to Bohemia and the life that they lost there. And two principal qualities of the past, I don't know if I want to write it, just pay attention, okay? The past is that you can never go back. You can't go back to the past. That's worth writing down. When we're talking about the past, you can never go back. You can never go back to the past. Never ever. Okay? And the other piece, the other side of that is somehow the past is better than now. It's both of these qualities that it has. You can never go back to it, and it was better. It was preferable to where we live now. Okay, this is all about nostalgia, right? Because it's better. It was better back then, but we can never go back. So we're nostalgic for it. If you are a poet out there, writing a poem about nostalgia would be really, really a cool idea. So, you know, the impossibility of returning is what drives the emotional feeling of this story. It might even reveal Willa Cather's own longing, her own nostalgia for the Nebraska of her childhood. But the third thing is, if the past can never be recovered, it can also never be escaped. It's always part of who we are and what our memories are. And it's Jim's fate to go on longing for this childhood that he can't ever escape, that shaped who the man who he is and the desires that he has. So that's theme number one, right, is our relationship, human relationships to the past, okay? The next theme is the immigrant experience in the United States. What is it to be an immigrant? What is it to be an American interacting with immigrants every day? So my Antonia explores lives of immigrants in the United States on the frontier, you know, in the second half of the 1800s, the mid to late 1800s. And the Nebraska prairie at this time is really kind of an ethnic mix, kind of hodgepodge of American-born settlers and a lot of different European ethnic groups immigrating there as well, both Eastern and Northern Europe. And so the novel creates a sympathetic look at a lot of the hardships that the immigrants have to go through coming to a brand new country. One of the ones that we hear about is homesickness. And sometimes intense homesickness and sadness and longing for what was their home that is now lost to them. Can you kind of see the connection with the past? This longing for the past that they can no longer go back to, and yet they're always from that place. Their past is so pivotal. They also struggle with the difficulties of not being able to speak English. So difficult to come to a brand new place where nobody except your family speaks your language, and struggling to learn all the time what people are saying and trying to make yourselves understood, so that it is challenging for these new immigrants. And also we have a whole different culture, we have different religious experiences and thoughts, and all of that these immigrants have to figure it out and understand it and overcome it if they're going to fit in with these American settlers. And to be honest, sometimes the American settlers were quite judgmental. Maybe they were even hostile. They did not want immigrants coming into their town. But they are the economic and cultural mainstream. And these immigrants have to find a way to get into the mainstream. And so that's a big struggle for any new immigrant who comes to this country to fit in with the mainstream society. And because sometimes these American attitudes are judgmental, it's sometimes difficult just to even get by for the immigrants because they don't get the same opportunities. They are, not welcome. They're not offered things if the people are hostile towards them. We see one example between Jim and Antonia. Jim gets to go to school, but because of Antonia's family's poverty, she does not have that choice. She has to stay home to help her family make a living. So very different experience from, an American male and an immigrant female. They have very different experiences. And the last theme that I want to talk about is the traditional nature of frontier values. Okay, what do we value out on the frontier? So my Antonia shows us the living conditions and the mindset of the people in the 1800s, as well as kind of the simple, hardworking, homespun ethic of the settlers on the frontier during that era. But there were also, rigid norms of society. Like, this is how society should be. So, like, that forces Jim to learn how to fight and swear because that's what boys do. That's what a real American boy on the frontier does. He fights with other boys and he knows all the swear words. And he may not even like those things, but those are the norm for a boy. And so he is caught in these cultural norms. On the flip side, the settlers share values, good values. They share values like family and community working together and shared faith. So they have a close-knit, positive community. And that's part of why there's a struggle with how much of, these immigrants' ideas and ways into our close-knit community. How much are we willing to adjust? But this idea of having a close-knit community of people like you is another thing that we see reflecting the nostalgia of the book. And so keep that word in mind. That's our key word for this novel, My Antonia by Willa Cather. Keep remembering that much of it is nostalgia. It's that looking back. Sometimes if you see in a movie or a TV show that they'll make things like soft focus when somebody's remembering like a great memory. And so some of this book is kind of told through Jim's soft focus of memory. But we can see as we look at the story and the way people behave and how it's difficult for one group and easy for another group, and how groups stay with their own kind and those kind of things, that it wasn't always so dreamy as our nostalgia wants it to be. All right, so you're going to be reading the introduction in the first 3 chapters this week, and you'll have a little assignment with your homework. So be sure you get that done. Get it back to me by next Thursday. And that's all I have for you today. So have a great day, and bye for now.